Hi everybody. I want to take you on a cycle ride and walk up my favourite glen, which is behind Blair Atholl. I'm standing currently in the middle of Blair Atholl. This is Blair Atholl Village Hall, which many of you will know. This is the entrance to Blair Castle. And swinging around, I'm going to go over the bridge here, the Bridge of Tilt. I'm going to turn left and go to the Tilt car park, which many of you will also know. My story starts there. Blair Atholl's here. I'm going to cycle up here, Bridge of Tilt, and that's Tarff. Falls of Tarff must be there. Now, if you follow that road on, which is the old traditional road, you'd go from Falls of Tarff all the way up to Braemar in that direction. As I say, this story is about Glen Tilt and where I cycle a lot, and I'm standing here just outside Glen Tilt car park, and you can see a couple of cars in there, no doubt locals, and that's where most of you will start from. And Glen Tilt is 16 miles in length, and I'm going to cycle today up to Falls of Tarff and tell you the story as we go along. The entrance to the glen is here. In front of us is Wade's Bridge and Wade's Road, and we're told that there was a lodge here at one time called Tibby's Lodge, named after the gatekeeper Tibby Cameron, who died in 1858. It was constructed when Wade's Road was built in 1728 as the only entrance from Atholl to Glen Tilt. It had a gate which used to be padlocked, and Tibby's Lodge was pulled down in 1884 and replaced by East Lodge, and this I think is East Lodge. I don't actually see a name on it, but that's the entrance just opposite Glen Tilt car park. Talking about Glen Tilt, you can see my bike just over here on the right, and I'm going to be cycling up here and telling you about the glen. The glen has changed little except for the number of people that live there, as I mentioned earlier. I've stopped here. I've just come down, having cycled from there all the way down here, and I've stopped here because it's just a lovely, lovely spot and very typical of Glen Tilt in its lower reaches. There is a bridge here. I don't actually know its name. Most of the bridges and places have names associated with people that live there. Tibby's Lodge was an example we saw earlier, and further up we'll come to another bridge like this called Gilbert's, and beyond that another one called Gaos Bridge, named after local people. Atholl Estates are particularly good at allowing people to responsibly access their land, and as I just pan down and show you a bit of the river. But it wasn't always this way, and in August 1847 a group of 6 botanists started from Braemar, which is at the far end. Glen Tilt runs through to Deeside and Braemar, Balmoral and all of that, and these 6 botanists walked from Braemar through Glen Tilt collecting flora on the way. They were confronted by a shooting party. As I pan round over the bridge, and I'm going to show you the top side, there's my bike, of the river. They were confronted by a shooting party who alleged they were walking on private land, and they ordered them to return to Braemar, which they politely refused and continued on down the glen. At Tibby's Lodge, the place where we started from and named after Tibby Cameron, they found the gate was locked and they could not pass without the Duke's permission. The Duke appeared and told them they were trespassing, and told them that they could return by the way they came, which was clearly impossible, having walked all day long. And so the party then escaped over a wall, pursued by the Duke's familiars, which I presume it means his employees or people who worked for the Duke. Isn't that water beautifully clear down there? It's kind of peaty coloured, but you can just so transparent looking at all those rocks. What then happened, the botanists did not leave it there. They took the case to law, to the courts, and 3 years later a decision was made against the Duke that he couldn't restrict people from walking on his land. The Duke wasn't satisfied with that, and he took it to the House of Lords. The Duke again lost the decision, and from this incident the Scottish Rights of Way Society was formed. So what I'm going to do now is cycle up round here, and we'll just stop at one other place which will look at the river, and then we'll go to Gilbert's Bridge. And I've stopped here because it's probably one of the best places to let you see the river down below. Just panning along, you'll see my bike sitting there as we walk along. Let's just pan back. There's been a fall of trees, which you can see here, and because of that it's opened up the river down below. And as I said to you before, the first mile or so of Glen Tilt has these very deep gorges with the water and the rocks bared at the bottom. And if you pan on up, we can see the hills up on the side, and that's where the rifle range is. There's a Glen Tilt shooting club and rifle range. And what I'm going to do now is cycle along to Gilbert's Bridge. The road now just starts to come out onto much more level ground. You can see the hills up behind, and we're going to head up over here, and that's the line of Glen Tilt. In front of us we have a cattle grid, and obviously these are made so that sheep and cattle can't go through here, and so you don't have to open a gate the whole time. To the left is Gilbert's Bridge. Let me just pan around here quickly. So that's the way we're going to go up. We're going to go up that road, but let me just stop for a second at Gilbert's Bridge, which is here. And I've always wondered why it was called, or why it is called Gilbert's Bridge. Everyone who lives here knows it as Gilbert's Bridge, and is named after William Gilbert Stewart, who had a cottage here, and he was a hillman. So obviously somebody who worked up in the hills, I'm guessing, for the estate. Let's just have a look at the water down below. You can see how rugged it is. And what I'm going to do is just pan round quickly over the top of the bike, and again we can look at the river down here. You can just see how distinct the rock formation is. And down. What I'm going to do is hide my bike here, because I'm going to go on a wee excursion, and you'll join me in a minute. Gilbert's Bridge, and panning round here, you do wonder if Gilbert the hillman lived anywhere near here as a pheasant jumps out in front of us. It's a natural place, you'd think, for somebody to have a house, and maybe these piles of stones along here were once a house. Anyway, speak to you in a minute when I get to my destination. I want to show you. This is actually the first time I have been here. The road up Glen Tilt actually goes on the opposite side of the glen, and you can probably just see it through the trees over there. And we may well stop there and look at this as well, but this is one of the many settlements where people used to live up Glen Tilt. But people used to eke out a living here, and I believe there was I need to look at my notes, but a couple of thousand people, or certainly in the hundreds, who lived here. And this is the remains of their houses, and we can just sit and speculate as to what it is. And as we just walk through here, you ask yourself, who lived here? Who were the people? And I know without much doubt at all that the archivist in Atholl Estates can tell you. Over here, a number of years ago, I approached the archivist, I think her name's Jane Anderson, and she did some digging for us, and she was able to tell us who lived here, their rent that they paid. In the early 1700s it was in kind and sheep and bulls of barley, but towards the end of the 1700s I believe money started to come into the payments, and she was able to tell us who the tenants were, how many were here, etc. And on the other side, what we'll do, I'll cycle up here, and I'll probably stop just around here because there's a story to do with that location as well, and the school, and no doubt people who lived here, their children would have gone to that school. I just cycled along here. Gilbert's was literally here, and we've just come here, but I just had to stop here because I wanted to show you these rock formations that are here. Rocks are a very big part of the story of Glen Tilt, and this section of the rock in particular tells us a lot. Just look at this. There's no silt at the bottom of any of this. Huge slabs going up the side and then down into the bottom. And I suspect all of this is scoured out in the winter rains and when we get all the snow melt that takes place. As I said to you, rocks are a very key bit of the Glen Tilt story. Just look at these big slabs here and further down there as well. Speak to you later. I've just cycled up here, and opposite us on the other side, these are the ruins that we were talking about just now, and we're on the road that I pointed out back then. You can see my bike here, and this place here is called Gilbert. Sorry for my Gaelic pronunciation, which is non-existent. Which translates as the field of the fork. There was a 42-acre farm here where crops were grown. John Kerr's book, which I rely on very heavily, and I recommend it, and I'll put a reference at the bottom in the text. It tells us that in 1776 a school was opened under Duncan Ferguson here, and he taught 40 boys and 13 girls, a total of 53 pupils. 10 years later, after opening the school, the school roll dropped from 53 to 44, and the school was closed as there were insufficient numbers at the school. Incredible, isn't it, if you think of that? So a little school, and again up here there's settlements up there, so there would have been settlements all around here. I'm going to cycle on from here and we'll stop further up the glen. I just cycled up along this road. There are a couple of black-faced sheep that did so much to change the highlands because they were much more profitable from hundreds and thousands of people trying to eke out their living from the glen. But I wanted to stop here because when I cycle through Glen Tilt, I always admire this rock formation. You just look at it and how it's pushed up at angles. You can see it all lying at angles up. Just spectacular. Just a little entrance here where the water has worn its way through. The next place we're going to stop at is a place called Marble Lodge, and it's just around the corner up here. I've just cycled up here, and this is a spot I often stop at when I cycle. I'm just going to pan round, and I'm going to show you a couple of things. Up here you can see some remains of human, I don't know whether they were settlements or whether they were where the sheep were held. Down the bottom is Marble Lodge, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then what we're going to do is we're going to head off up round here, round the glen, to Forest Lodge. I've just cycled down to Marble Lodge. Marble Lodge was built in 1815, and John Kerr's book tells me it was built as a shooting lodge, but I find that quite surprising because it's such a small lodge, and it's nearby a quarry, a marble quarry, which we'll talk about a bit more later. And then further up here, if I cross over this cattle grid or sheep grid as it would be here, along, let's see if we can find where the marble is. So just look over the edge here. Let's just see if we can see any marble down here. There are strips of marble in the river. Just down here you can see a seam of marble going across the river. And one just here, and there's another one just there. I'm walking now up to Gaos Bridge, and there is a lady who asked me to have a look and see and show her Gaos Bridge. Well, as we come round this corner, we'll see Gaos Bridge. Kind of gives you some idea of the bridge. And on the east bank of the bridge, there's a track, and the track leads up to Marble Quarry, which is up here. Thought you might enjoy seeing this person wondering what on earth we're up to. Down the bottom there's Marble Lodge. Just here is Gaos Bridge, and on the opposite side there's a track John Kerr's book tells me led up to Marble Quarry, and it tells us the quarry was on the east bank of the river, and in the 1820s was described as containing an immense blocks of marble varying from grass green into yellowish cast intermixed with grey. And up to 8 men worked in the quarry, and a weekly output of 4 blocks. Blocks were boxed and transported down to Dunkeld. The marble was cut and polished, and unfortunately, due to the quality of the marble, the quarry was not sustainable. There were cheaper imports arriving by the early 1830s. I'm guessing would have been up here somewhere, because you can see the track running along. I'm going to now head on up this path here up to the top, and I get a lovely view of the glen. I'm just stopping here because again this is another special spot. Down the bottom here was Gaos Bridge, Marble Lodge on the side, and that track that was coming up to the Marble Quarry was coming up here. And I'm not sure if that was to do with the quarry, but if you go up again you can see the track running along here, and I don't know what that track's for or why it was there, whether it was also to do with marble. I just love this spot. Often I'll come and rest my bike and just take in this scenery. And as I say, in the winter months, also in the late evenings in the summer, you'll often see herds of deer. And I'm going to cycle on round and round here. I'm just going to pan round slowly, and we're going to see another settlement over here on the hills. I wonder who lived there. You can see the end of his gable house. Pan round here to glass, which means grey stone, and it was here that probably one of the most famous people of Blair Atholl and Glen Tilt lived, a guy called Donald Macbeth. You'll see him as you come into Blair Atholl. You'll see he's the Highlander that welcomes you to Blair Atholl, and this is where his family lived. And you can imagine this. He was a marksman. He served in the Crimea. He was decorated in the Crimea, and in 1861 Queen Victoria identified him as a man of great presence with an immense war record. Having served in the Crimea with distinction, he became Sergeant Major of the Atholl Highlanders. And so, a lovely part of the world to live in if you are here today. Not, I suspect, if you're trying to eke out a living, but I'm sure many of these hardy Highlanders did. We've travelled about 8 miles up Glen Tilt, and we've come round there and along here in this road to the side, and I'm going to swing round, and you can just see the sides of the glen now are really sheer and steep, quite a lot of rock on them, and I just want to stop here. Yes, we've got that wind, but I just wanted to stop and show you Forest Lodge, and that's Forest Lodge. It was built as a shooting lodge in 1789. The river's down on our left here, and we've just cycled up here. Forest Lodge is round the corner, and this spot I'm coming to now is a very special place. It resulted in what is known as modern geology because of the rock formation. In front of us is called Dallan S Bridge. And Dallan S Bridge, the bridge is no longer here. In 1785, a man called Hutton came and visited this spot, and he is known as the father of modern geology. Geology at that time followed a theory called Neptunism, which stated that the rocks of the world precipitated out of a vast ocean. Hutton just didn't believe this was right, and so he came here and he said the granite is here found breaking and displacing the strata in every conceivable manner, including the fragments of broken strata interjected at every possible direction which appear. I just want to show you a picture, a watercolour that was painted and given to me by my friend John Cameron, the late John Cameron, who was very much the father of Blair Atholl in modern times. And I just see this wind again, but this is the waterfall that was painted here to reflect the bridge that is here, and you can just see the remains of the bridge here. In giving me the picture, John said, we spoke about the meeting of the white and pink rock of Glen Tilt beside a fallen bridge shown on the TV programme Man of Rock. And Man of Rock was all about Hutton and Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th and 19th century. The watercolour, John tells me, came from Donald Macbeth's house, and we've just passed Donald Macbeth's house. It shows the bridge and two big stones where the two rocks met. When my grandfather was a farmer on Atholl, John said, he dropped a stone from the bridge and killed a large salmon below. Well, I've just had my lunch, and there's my bike, and I'm going to cycle along the road up around, you can just see the road there, around the glen to Falls of Tarff. It's quite a long way still. We've cycled from down here. You can see the sunlight is down right down the far end. We seem to have come into the dark side in all the shadow. This is the road coming up and on to the right. This little side glen was part of what caught my eye, and I'm going to just zoom in to the top of it, and you know, I just thought that looked lovely up there. This is where we're going. We're going to go right up here, and it's still a long way to go. I've stopped here because I think this is the last time we'll be able to look all the way down the glen, and those trees down there around there is where we talked about Hutton, father of modern geology, and the waterfall. The hill that you see on the skyline there, I believe that's Schiehallion. I don't know if the camera is quite good enough, but there's a little bit of snow to the right of it on the top. Just thought I'd stop and show you where I am. It's cycled a bit further on. This is where we've come from, right down there. There's high glens either side. I'm just going to follow the river that's down below us, and I'm going to show you where we're heading off to. And as I say, there's very steep sided glen on both sides here, and we'll pan round and you can see my bike, and we're going to head off down this track along here. Falls of Tarff, further on round to the left. I've stopped and just walked up here to a shieling or a waterfall called Rued Alt a Crodre, shieling of the hanging burn, as we know it is in English. The shieling is a place where people would have used as a summer dwelling place when they bought their cattle. I'll show you that in a little bit more later. So let me do it. I'm going to just pan around. So this is, I think, is the spot. You can see it's a lovely glade, and we're going to just pan round if the camera will follow me. And I think the shieling or the dwelling house was probably just down here in this sheltered spot, and you can see the glen all the way around us. Also connected with this spot, Queen Victoria, who came here in 1844 and said to have had this spectacular view as she watched Prince Albert and a shooting party. It's actually quite hidden, and I am going to make my way up just to this knoll here, as I suspect we'll get a much better view. I don't know if I'll leave this camera on. Okay, I'll see what happens as we make our way down. You can see how deep it is down there. That's going to make me think twice. I don't fancy falling down that. Anyway, that's the hanging burn, and you can see why it's called the hanging burn. It's a lovely spot, and you can see the road heading up to the Falls of Tarff. Dow Fienach, or Shaggy Haw, which I think is this area over here. It said in 1716 John Mackintosh lived here, and he had a farm of 20 acres, and I think it must have been around this area. In 1564, Mary Queen of Scots visited Perthshire as a guest of the Earl of Atholl. It is said that the Earl organised a hunt for her. An account is given of this by Professor Berkeley, who was one of the Queen's party. Professor Berkeley tells of this 1564 hunt, so you're talking about 450 odd years ago. It's a long time if you think about it. Anyway, Professor Berkeley tells us 2,000 Highlanders, or wild Scots as you call them here, were employed to drive the hunting ground of all deer from the woods and hills of Atholl, Badenoch, Murray and the counties about. As these Highlanders used a light dress and are very swift of foot, they went up and down so nimbly that in less than 2 months they brought together 2,000 red deer besides roes and fallow. They were killed that day 360 deer with fibrils, I'm not quite sure what a fibril is, and some roes. And I suspect that this spot here is where it took place, because I just think it's such a lovely spot, so remote, very few people come up here. We'll go on round here in the Falls of Tarff around that corner. And there's been a massive rock fall off this face here. You can see all the fresh rock down there. I suspect what happens is that the water gets behind the rock and then it freezes, and inch by inch it prizes the rock away, and that looks pretty fresh to me. I was going to talk to you about these trees as well. If you look along the top there, you can see a few trees, and you then say, why are they there and not farther down the glen? All this bit here, why aren't there trees here? Well, the answer's in front of us. If you look at these white dots, they're sheep, and the sheep graze all the vegetation, all along with the excessive deer numbers that we have here. The red deer are in huge numbers. My own personal view, it would be nice if you introduced the wolf, but our farmers are not very friendly towards our wildlife here. In Perthshire, they hate the beaver and they're out there exterminating them at every opportunity. It's a great shame on Scotland. If we had tigers here, they'd be shooting them too, or if there were elephants, no doubt they would be justifying that too. Anyway, we're going to cycle along here. Falls of Tarff is just around that corner there. I've just cycled along here, and this is the end of the road. So I'm going to walk now to the Falls of Tarff, and I'm just going to pan around and just show you the scenery. And down below us here is the river. I'm leaving my bike here, and it's a path from now on, and I'll talk to you for a bit. You can feel this wind which has accompanied us, and I hope it'll blow me back to Blair Atholl and home again to Killiecrankie, where I live. But the little rivulets on the way, like here, and I'm very pleased I didn't bring my bike or attempt to cycle this bit of the path. As you can see, it's nigh on impossible. You can see how worn the path is, can't you? And you can see bike tracks as well. We're coming to the Falls of Tarff now. We can see the bridge, and I'll walk a little bit further on, and you can see the pass through which it comes from here down, and there's a waterfall, if I remember correctly, down the bottom there. In 1770, a single arch stone bridge was built over the Tarff by a stonemason, John Stewart. I'm not sure if we can see any of that, but we'll look at it when we go down and see. Bridge was removed in 1819. The Scottish Rights of Way incident was 1849. That's 30 years after the bridge had been removed. And in 1861, Queen Victoria, Prince Albert the sixth Duke of Atholl, forded the Tarff here on their way back to Balmoral after staying with the Duke. In Queen Victoria's diary, she wrote, "A very few moments brought us to the celebrated ford of Tarff, which is very deep and after heavy rain almost impossible. Sandy Macara, the guide, and two pipers went first all the time." And there's a well-known picture of the Queen riding her horse through the river here, flanked either side by two strong Highlanders in case she should fall in, God forbid, and all that. And the pipers playing, incredible. I wonder how far the pipers would have played. I'm sure they would have walked while the nobility were on their horses. In August 1879, which is, what is that? That's 60 years after the bridge reduced. Two English students crossed the river while in spate. One lost his life. And in 1886, 7 years later, the Bedford Bridge was built and named in memory of the man who lost his life. And it's just magic, absolutely magic. What a beautiful spot this is. As I say, I'm absolutely honoured, privileged, lucky, whatever, to live in this part of Scotland. I'm going to swing round, and maybe what I'll do is I'll keep walking and we'll just walk down the other side of the bridge. I see there's a plaque here, so let's just have a look at this plaque and see what it says. It says the bridge was erected in 1886 with funds donated by his friends and others. The Scottish Rights of Way Society Limited to commemorate the death of Francis John Bedford, aged 18, who was drowned near here on the 25th of August 1879. Yeah, well, I bet you he didn't expect this. But what a lovely part of Scotland, isn't it? Just as I just walk down here, I'm going to go down to the river, and that'll be the end of our walk up Falls Tarff. I'll cycle all the way back home, and thank you for staying with me, for those of you who've survived the ordeal, and no doubt I'll do another one or another area some other time to tell you a bit more about this wonderful part of Scotland in Perthshire and the Highlands of Perthshire that we live in. Isn't that wonderful? Wow! Incredible.